detecting communities as well?
Thanks, Umesh. So I don't think I need to motivate communities. Why it's important? You all know that we want to detect communities in social networks. But let me just mention there are a bunch of other applications. For example, in biology, you can talk about protein-protein interaction graphs. You can try to model what will happen in the stock market by looking at the community of stocks. You can figure out which lobby owns your senator by looking at votes in Congress, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The question is just how to find those communities, and we want to do this efficiently. But before we can talk about how to efficiently find communities, we should discuss what is a community. And there are many models. Probably the most studied model is the stochastic block model and its variants. So let me tell you what it is. You partition the graph into, you assume that there is an unknown partitioning of the graph into communities, and of the vertices, sorry, and then the graph that you see is sampled similarly, like Uma said, similarly to the plan and click model. So edges inside the community appear with probability alpha, which is larger than beta, and beta are the edges across communities. Yeah, so this is, like I said, this is extremely popular. So I was working on this paper last June. I was traveling in the East Coast to some conferences. On Monday, there was a talk at ICML. On Tuesday, there were 2 talks at Stock. Wednesday, there was another talk at, sorry about that. Feel free to update some files. Anyway, on Wednesday, there was another talk at ICML. On Thursday, there was an entire session at Colt. And this continues to be very popular. And even today, we're going to have a talk about the stochastic block model. So stochastic block model is awesome, and I hope the work on it continues. Just cite my paper for justification for studying it. But let me just, I was looking for a quote by Shai Ben David, but I found this quote in Moitre's paper. This is a quote from the paper that studies stochastic block model. And what they're saying is that the real networks aren't actually sampled from this distribution that you assume. And if you're really focused on this particular distribution, maybe the algorithms that you have are over-tailored to this distribution. So, like I said, if you're talking about a physical model of like atom interaction or something like that, that's typically described very well by a concrete randomized model. If you're talking about human interactions, we don't have such precise models. And also the stochastic models, most of the variants don't allow overlapping communities. If we're talking about, again, human interactions, then I'm both American, I'm also Israeli, I'm also a computer scientist. They're all overlapping communities. There is the alpha-beta communities model, which I'll tell you about in the next slide. It will be the focus of this talk. But I want to mention there are many models, and there isn't a single model that uniformly is the best for all applications. So for your applications, you should think which model is the most appropriate. Okay, so the alpha-beta community model, it's very similar to the stochastic block model, but there is no generative assumptions. So we have a concrete graph, and we're looking for a subset of the vertices C, such that every member of the community is friends with an alpha fraction of the community. And if I'm not part of the community, then I'm friends with at most a beta fraction of the community. So some examples. So in this graph, the red dots are one community, so it's a nice clique. The yellow community is also a community, and I want to have this example of the white community. And you see there is first of all, you see the red and white communities are overlapping, and also this vertex, actually most of its neighbors are in the red community, but the white community is still, he's still friends with all of the white community. So that's still a 1, 1/3 community. Okay, so unlike Uma said, this model has been relatively very well studied in the theory community. There are a bunch of algorithms for special cases. I don't want to bother you with the details. It's a relatively well studied model. The other thing I want to tell you about previous work is this paper by Aroa et al. That gives a quasi-polynomial time algorithm for finding communities for any constant alpha and beta, where alpha is larger than beta. The algorithm is very simple. I can show you the algorithm. So you enumerate over all the log n tuples of communities. That takes n to the log n time. And when you have a log n tuple you assume that this is log n tuples of vertices. When you have a log n tuple, you're saying, okay, I hope this is a representative sample of a community, and I'm going to look at all the vertices that are friends with more than alpha plus beta over 2 fraction of S. And I'm going to test whether C is a community. So, like I said, the running time is n to the log n because we're enumerating over all the log n tuples. And this means this problem is probably not NP hard. Exponential time hypothesis. Just a second. So, exponential time hypothesis postulates that 3-SAT takes approximately exponential time, so 2 to the omega n. And just to make sure no one is confused, this is much weaker than the strong exponential time hypothesis. Yeah.
I mean, might this sort of thing reasonably be NP hard if alpha and beta are very close?
Yeah, of course. So if alpha 1 is beta is almost one that you're looking for a clique, and that's obviously NP hard. But for different constant alpha and beta, then it's thanks. And like I said, there are many. So essentially, the same algorithm appears in different works for different applications, like Nash equilibrium and densest K subgraph. But what's unique about this application of Aroa et al.'s application of this algorithm is that because the communities are two alpha beta communities, if they're not the same community, they have to be quite different from each other. We can the algorithm actually counts all the communities, and in fact enumerates over all the communities. So the punchline of the paper is that you actually need n to the log n time. So specifically, if you assume exponential time hypothesis, you need approximately n to the log n time to distinguish between the following. So in the completeness case, the graph has a 1 and epsilon, which is a subconstant community, so the biggest gap you can hope for, so a clique that has almost no friends outside the clique, versus any community that has a you're slightly more likely to be friends with this community, and it's you actually need quasi-poly time to distinguish between those two. And let me mention there is some harness in previous work. So Balkan et al. They show a planned clique harness for detecting a 1 versus 1 minus epsilon community for some unspecified small epsilon. So let me just mention that ETH is typically considered a safer assumption than planned clique harness, and also this holds for much more general range of parameters. And like I promised in the title, you can also ask about the complexity of counting the number of communities, and we get a similar result, but now we only assume sharp ETH, so the assumption that counting the number of satisfying assignments requires approximately exponential time. And as far as I know, this is very likely to be true even if p is equal to np. So it's a quite light assumption. So let me tell you a little bit about the proof, unless there are questions about the statements. So this is going to be the first attempt. You know, the punchline is it fails, but it's going to kind of show you how we can even where does n to the log n come in, and why can we get n to the log n harness. So we're going to start with the problem of 3 coloring. We're looking for a 3 coloring of a graph, and we know it's NP hard, and by our assumption it actually requires exponential time. And we want to construct a communities graph. So the set of new vertices is going to be, I'm going to pick for every root and tuple of vertices in the old graph. I'm going to look at every root and tuple and every possible coloring of the root and tuple. So I have n choose root n tuples, and for each one I have 3 to the root n possible colorings. So approximately 2 to the root n total new vertices. And for each one I'm going to construct a new vertex in the new graph. And the way I construct the edges is, if you look at this vertex and this vertex colors this old vertex blue, and this vertex colors this old vertex green. So they don't agree on a vertex, so that's a consistency disagreement. And also, I don't have an example here, but if they color the 2 ends of the same edge with the same color, that's a constraint disagreement. But if they don't violate any constraints and they don't violate any consistency, any consistencies, then there is an edge between them. So that's the entire reduction. The entire reduction that doesn't work. But where does n to the log n come in? So our reduction size is 2 to the root n. So capital N is approximately 2 to the root n, and we assume by ETH running time for 3 coloring takes 2 to the omega n. So if you do the math, 2 to the n is approximately capital N to the log capital N. So let me try to analyze this reduction and show you a few places where it doesn't work. So okay, here's what we can say about this reduction. If the original graph was 3 colorable, the new graph actually contains a clique of size k, where k is n choose root n. So you take your assignment that correctly colors the whole graph, and you look at all the n choose root n root n tuples, and that's they're all connected because they all agree and they don't violate any edge constraints. Sorry. And if the original graph was not 3 colorable, then you can say that for any case, any subgraph of size k, it has at most 1 minus epsilon of the edges. So here we would get alpha equals 1, which is very nice, and here we would get not the sub-constant alpha that I promised you, but some alpha smaller than 1. Which is nice. So there are many problems with this reduction. For example, it only works for a specific k, whereas the communities can be of any size. But the biggest challenge that we had to overcome here is what happens about the weak ties. So this is only concerned with the alpha, the strong ties inside the community. What happens outside the community? So suppose I have a vertex that like a meta vertex that looks almost like this meta vertex. I just switch the color of this old vertex from blue to red. So if we have 2 vertices that are almost the same, they would have almost the same neighbors. But this vertex is inside the community, this vertex is outside the community. We're not going to get a separation of alpha and beta. They're going to be almost the same. Okay, so here's the real reduction, and there's an asterisk because it's up to a lot of flies. The problem that we had is that if we have 2 vertices that are almost the same, then we have almost the same edges, and then we're not going to get a separation between what's inside the community, clear separation between what's inside the community and what's outside the community. So the solution to this is to use error correcting codes, and now every 2 vertices are going to be very far from each other. So let me show you a very rough sketch of how this is done. I'm going to take a large finite field of size approximately slightly bigger than root n, so root n times log n. And H will be a smallish subset of this field of size only root n. And if for any encoding, for any coloring of the original graph, I will encode it as a function from h squared to f. So also it can be from h squared to like 1, 2, 3. That's enough, right? And now I have a function over h squared, and I can extend it to a low degree over the entire f squared. So now it's a low degree, so I have, this is like the Reed-Muller correcting code, right? And now for each row or column of the, for each row or column of f squared, I can construct a new vertex that corresponds to an assignment to this row and column, and again I have it roughly corresponds to root n original vertices. So have size reduction size approximately 2 to the root n. And now because of the error correcting property of the Reed-Muller, I don't have two similar vertices, and I continue the reduction approximately as the questions. Okay, super simple, right? That's it. So let me just have a summary slide. Quasi-polynomial time is very necessary for community detection. And let me end with a note that I really like quasi-polynomial time harness. And if you have a problem that you think, so you have a quasi-poly time algorithm where you think the right running time is quasi-polynomial time, come and talk to me offline. Thanks.
Questions? Well, thank you for